Picture this. It's 1,940. The sun is unforgiving over the Nevada desert. Wind kicks up clouds of dust that sting your eyes. A few wooden buildings line a quiet street. There's no neon here, no music, no roar of slot machines, just a gas station, a diner, and a handful of locals who know every face in town. This was Las Vegas before it became Las Vegas. A dusty pit stop on Highway 91 where travelers refueled their cars, not their dreams. Nobody could have imagined that within just 2 decades, this nowhere town would transform into America's ultimate symbol of indulgence, a glowing oasis of lights, money, and fantasy. But behind every miracle, there's a formula. For Las Vegas, it wasn't luck, it was timing. 3 things collided to create the spark. First, a desperate gamble by Nevada lawmakers during the Great Depression, the legalization of gambling in 1931. Second, an engineering marvel, the Hoover Dam, completed in 1936, that brought electricity, jobs, and a reason for people to stay. And third, a new breed of risk-takers, part businessman, part outlaw, who saw the desert not as a wasteland, but as a blank canvas. What emerged was more than a city. It was an experiment in capitalism, in psychology, and in spectacle. Vegas was built not just to take your money, but to make you feel good about losing it. Over the next 25 minutes, we'll travel back to the early decades when this desert mirage began to shimmer into reality, a story of ambition, sin, and visionaries who turned sand into gold. To understand how Las Vegas rose from dust to dominance, you have to go back to the 1930 seconds, one of the darkest decades in American history. The Great Depression had crushed the economy. Banks failed, factories closed, and families packed up everything they owned to chase hope across the country. But in Nevada, a handful of lawmakers saw opportunity where others saw despair. In 1931, the Nevada legislature passed a simple, radical law. Gambling was now legal. It was meant to be a quick fix, a way to raise tax revenue and attract visitors during hard times. At first, it barely made a ripple. Nevada was remote, poor, and sparsely populated. Las Vegas had fewer than 5,000 residents and only one paved road. Meanwhile, Reno, not Vegas, was the state's gambling hub. But fate had other plans. Just 5 years later, the Hoover Dam changed everything. When construction began, thousands of workers flooded into the desert, transforming the once empty valleys into a bustling community. They needed food, shelter, and most of all, entertainment. And when the dam was completed in 1936, it left behind something even more valuable than concrete and turbines: a massive supply of cheap electricity and a population that didn't want to leave. That power, literal and economic, became the heartbeat of what would come next. Electricity allowed for air conditioning, bright lights, and the kind of all-night spectacles that no other city could offer at the time. Suddenly, the idea of building a neon paradise in the middle of nowhere didn't seem crazy, it seemed inevitable. By the end of the decade, Las Vegas had already begun to transform. The first small casinos appeared along Fremont Street, catering to construction workers and travelers passing through. It wasn't glamorous yet, more whiskey and dust than champagne and chandeliers, but the foundation was there. Nevada had made the gamble, the dam had delivered the power, and the desert, for the first time in its history, felt alive with possibility. The next question was, who would have the courage or the ruthlessness to turn that potential into an empire? As Las Vegas began to flicker with promise, a new kind of investor took notice, not bankers or real estate developers, but mobsters. For America's organized crime families, the desert offered something irresistible: legal gambling, low taxes, and distance from federal scrutiny. It was a place where money could disappear into the sand and come back clean. Among these men, one name would define the era: Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. A charismatic, ruthless gangster from New York, Siegel had a vision far grander than smoky backroom casinos. He didn't just want to make money, he wanted to create a spectacle. In 1945, he took control of a half-finished resort project called the Flamingo Hotel, funded by mob money through his partner Meyer Lansky. What Siegel built was unlike anything the desert had ever seen. The Flamingo, which opened in 1946, was a pink and white palace of fantasy. Marble floors, tropical gardens, chandeliers imported from Europe. and a cocktail lounge that looked like something out of Hollywood. Guests could gamble, drink, swim, dine, and dance all under one roof. But it wasn't just about luxury, it was about emotion. Bugsy wanted every guest, rich or poor, to feel like a movie star. And in a way, that was his genius. Las Vegas stopped being about cards and dice, it became about transformation. Here, anyone could arrive as a nobody and for one weekend, live like Sinatra. The grand opening, however, was a disaster. Construction delays, cost overruns, and bad weather kept guests away. Within months, the Flamingo was hemorrhaging money. Siegel's mob partners grew impatient. In June 1947, Bugsy Siegel was shot dead in his girlfriend's Beverly Hills home, a brutal end to a dream that had only just begun. Yet his death didn't kill the vision. In fact, it lit the fuse. The Flamingo survived, turning profitable soon after, and became the blueprint for everything that followed. By the late 1940s, the desert highway south of town began to fill with new resorts, the Sahara, the Desert Inn, the Sands. That lonely stretch of road would soon earn a name recognized around the world: the Las Vegas Strip. What started as a gangster's gamble had become America's new obsession. The desert was no longer silent, it was singing, and the tune was money. By the dawn of the 1952, Las Vegas was no longer a desert outpost, it was a booming empire of light, luxury, and illusion. The Flamingo's success had proven one thing: people didn't just want to gamble, they wanted to feel something. And the casino owners, many with mob money behind them, understood that emotion was the most profitable currency of all, so they went bigger. In just a few short years, the Strip transformed into a glittering corridor of fantasy. The Sahara, the Sands, the Desert Inn, the Tropicana, each one a palace built to outshine the last. Guests arrived by the busload, stepping off planes and trains to find marble lobbies, champagne fountains, and dealers in tuxedos. You could lose your paycheck at the blackjack table, but you'd do it under chandeliers and live orchestras, and somehow, it felt worth it. Las Vegas became the place where dreams were for sale, 24 hours a day. And at the heart of it all were the entertainers, the ones who turned the desert into the world's most glamorous stage. The 1950s were ruled by the Rat Pack: Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop, and Peter Lawford. They weren't just performing, they were defining cool. The Sands Hotel was their playground, where laughter, whiskey, and music flowed freely long after midnight. Crowds packed the Copa Room to watch Sinatra croon "Fly Me to the Moon," while gamblers toasted to fortunes lost and won. Vegas had become a parallel universe, a place where time didn't exist. The lights never dimmed, the bars never closed, and morality was negotiable. What happens here wasn't yet a slogan, but it was already a truth. And while the casinos dazzled with style, Vegas also found a darker, stranger kind of spectacle: the atomic age. Just 65 miles away, the U.S. government was testing nuclear bombs in the Nevada desert. Instead of hiding it, Vegas turned it into a tourist attraction. Hotels hosted atomic brunches where guests sipped cocktails named the Mushroom Cloud while watching distant flashes light up the horizon. The absurdity became part of the allure. Vegas had no boundaries, not even fear. By the end of the decade, the numbers told the story. Visitor counts skyrocketed past 8 million people a year, and the city's economy was exploding. Room rates were cheap, meals were practically free, and the casinos didn't mind losing money on buffets because they knew they'd win it back at the tables. But beyond the profits, Vegas had found something deeper: an identity. It wasn't apologetic or polite or restrained. It was loud, wild, and proudly artificial, a city that promised you could be whoever you wanted to be for as long as your money lasted, and that, more than anything, was the secret of its success. Vegas didn't sell gambling. Vegas sold permission, the permission to forget who you were and to live for a fleeting weekend like a king under neon skies. By the early 1960s, Las Vegas had conquered America's imagination. It was no longer just a destination, it was a phenomenon, a place where fantasy and finance coexisted. But while the bright lights blinded visitors, a quieter transformation was taking shape behind the scenes, one that would change the DNA of the city forever. The mob, for all its glamour and notoriety, was losing control. The same forces that helped build Vegas money, opportunity, and ambition were now drawing the attention of a new kind of power, corporate America. Federal investigations in the late 1950s had begun cracking down on organized crime, tracing illegal money through casino vaults and shell companies. With public pressure mounting, legitimate investors saw an opening to clean up the city's image and take a slice of the pie. Enter Howard Hughes, the eccentric billionaire who arrived in Las Vegas in 1966 and checked into the top floor of the Desert Inn. He never checked out. Within a few years, Hughes quietly bought up some of the Strip's most iconic resorts, including the Sands, the Frontier, and the Castaways, effectively pushing the mob aside. His influence signaled something profound. The era of gangsters was ending, and the era of corporations had begun. What made this shift so powerful wasn't just money, it was philosophy. The mob ran Vegas on instinct and charisma. It was about making guests feel like royalty. Corporate America, on the other hand, ran on spreadsheets and quarterly reports. It measured success not in applause or loyalty, but in profit margins and revenue per square foot. That meant cutting costs, standardizing service, and optimizing every aspect of the guest experience. The casinos became cleaner, safer, more polished, but also less personal. The danger, the charm, even the mischief that once defined Vegas began to fade. Yet, paradoxically, this new structure laid the groundwork for Vegas's survival. The corporate model brought in bank financing, stock market capital, and scalability. It allowed the city to grow faster, reach further, and prepare for the global tourism wave that was coming. Vegas had shed its outlaw skin. It was becoming a business, an empire that played by the rules of capitalism, not chaos. The lights still burned bright, but something intangible, something human was quietly slipping away. For 2 decades, Las Vegas had seemed invincible, a city immune to the rules of reality. But even mirages, no matter how bright, begin to shimmer and distort over time. Beneath the neon glow of the 1,960 seconds, small cracks were starting to appear in the illusion that Vegas had built so perfectly. The first warning signs came from within the casinos themselves. Corporate ownership brought structure, but it also brought distance. The mob bosses who once strolled the casino floors, shaking hands and comping dinners, were replaced by executives in corner offices who rarely met their guests. The personal touch, the thing that made people feel like Vegas cared, began to fade. And as the world changed, so did America's tastes. The glamour of the 1,950 seconds gave way to the turbulence of the 1,960 seconds, the counterculture movement, rock and roll, Vietnam protests, and the rise of new forms of entertainment. Younger generations weren't as enchanted by Rat Pack cool or lounge shows. They wanted Woodstock, rebellion, and authenticity. Vegas, meanwhile, still sold the fantasy of tuxedos and showgirls. Slowly, the city began to feel out of step. At the same time, competition was growing. Air travel had become more affordable, and new tourist destinations, Miami, Los Angeles, the Caribbean, began to attract travelers who once would have gone to the desert. Las Vegas was no longer the only playground for the American dream. It was just one of many. The numbers still looked good on paper. Hotels were full. Gamblers kept coming, but the atmosphere was shifting. Locals sensed it first. The energy on the Strip was changing. The laughter wasn't as loud, the nights not as wild. Vegas was still profitable, but it was no longer magical. And perhaps most dangerously, the new corporate culture began to think short-term. Every decision was about next quarter's profits, raising prices here, cutting costs there. The seeds of a future problem were quietly being planted. The slow erosion of value, the loss of generosity, and the start of what some would later call the death of old Vegas. It wasn't visible yet, not in the crowds or the lights, but for those who looked closely, the shimmer of the mirage was starting to waver. Before the Strip became a polished corridor of glass towers and corporate brands, old Vegas was something different, something human. It wasn't just about the money people lost or won. It was about how they felt while losing or winning it. Old Vegas believed in showmanship over spreadsheets, charm over control, and experience over efficiency. The dealers remembered your name. The bartenders poured heavy, not because they had to, but because they wanted you to stay for one more story. Even the mob, as dangerous as it was, understood the psychology of indulgence. They knew that if you made a man feel like a king, he'd gladly empty his pockets. It was also a place where America could forget itself. In a country divided by class, race, and politics, the casino floor was one of the few places where everyone was equal. The cards didn't care who you were. For a few hours, a steelworker from Chicago and a movie star from Hollywood could sit side by side, both chasing the same dream luck. And in that dream, Las Vegas became a mirror for the nation. It reflected America's hunger for hope, its faith in reinvention, and its addiction to risk. People didn't come to Vegas because it was rational. They came because it made them feel alive. Looking back, that's what Old Vegas truly sold. Not gambling, not luxury, but permission. Permission to escape, to pretend, to live without consequences. It was a city built on the art of forgetting, but every illusion has a price. And as the city grew richer, it also grew colder, more calculated, more transactional. The soul that once made Vegas magical was quietly slipping into memory. By 1960, Las Vegas had completed its transformation from dusty railroad town to the entertainment capital of the world. The skyline shimmered with neon promises, the lounges pulsed with laughter and jazz, and for millions of Americans, Vegas represented something deeper than luxury. It was the embodiment of possibility. But what made Vegas legendary would also become its greatest vulnerability. The same hunger that built the city, the desire for more, would one day turn inward, consuming the very spirit that made it special. Old Vegas thrived on personality, intimacy, and risk. The Vegas that followed would be driven by numbers, algorithms, and corporations. The neon still burns, the dice still roll, but the feeling, that intoxicating sense that anything could happen, began to fade. The dream hadn't died, not yet, but the city was already changing. And as the 1,970 seconds approached, a new chapter waited beyond the glow. The age of mass tourism, mega resorts, and the slow, invisible drift away from magic toward machinery. This was just the beginning.